And as I proudly stand up with my pecker up to the sun, chipping away at the eggshell like a newborn chick, emerging into all the potentials of a future reality. What did you think I meant by pecker when I started that? Welcome to The Velocity of Now, show number 12. My name is Thomas Sheridan, and you're listening to The Velocity of Now on the Type 1 Radio Network. Thanks to Steve and the rest of the gang there down in Brighton for producing the show. And thank you for listening in enormous numbers. The growth of this show is fantastic. It's really taken off big time, and it's probably one of the fastest growing show, if not the fastest growing alternative radio show out there at the moment. And thank you. Thank you for being such, loyal and dedicated and interested listeners. And I love all your feedback, and I love all your support, and I love all your suggestions for ideas and everything else. If you want to find out about me and my work, go to thomassheridanarts.com. It is a constellation of information on everything you would ever want to know about, from identifying and escaping from psychopaths to esoteric subjects to lots of art, lots of insight, lots of wisdom, lots of knowledge, and lots of bullshit too, including many laughs. If you want to support me, you can buy a couple of books there. I've got 3 books: Puzzling People, The Labyrinth of the Psychopath, Defeated Demons, Freedom from Consciousness, Parasites in Psychopathic Society, and The Anvil of the Psyche. You can also send me a few. If you can't read or you don't like reading or anything like that, I just want to say thanks. You can throw me a few quid to the donate button, and thank you to lovely people who have already done that. It's allowed me to invest in the show and get some new equipment. And I've got big plans for the future. I wasn't sure if this show would take off or it would die a death or people would have no interest in it. But now that we have a real buzz and things are happening and people are tuning in and we're developing a kind of a nice little, scene here, let's develop and take it as far as we can, because we are the new media. The old media is dead. The only purpose the old media exists for is so we can look at it just to see how outrageous, how tragic, and how debased it is, and give us a benchmark from which we can escape from this crap that they pile upon us in order to make this horrible planet called Earth, horrible reality, into a better and more enjoyable thing. We're never going to make heaven on earth, but we can make hell very, very tolerable. I truly do believe that. And this is another thing they play on our minds. They tell us that we can have heaven and eternal happiness and glory and all this stuff. But the reality is we're not destined for that as a species. What we're destined for as a species is creativity and expansion of consciousness in order to become the most powerful beings in the universe, which we probably already are, and to take that and rebuild a new universe in the image of a creative intention of the collective human experience going forward. We can actually escape the shit, we can push the psychopaths down, but we can't have perfection on this planet, because that would be unnatural, because we need that friction in order to create new possibility tangents, new novelties, and then create new potentials and new realities for us to tackle and battle with, because that's all it's about. Now, last week's show, I had Joseph Campbell and Royal Gilmore on, and it was absolutely phenomenal talking to those two guys. And your reviews of that show, some of the things you've been saying about it, saying it's some of the best radio you ever heard, thank you for that. It was a special hour. And for the second hour tonight, we're going to have, again, Adam from the Glasgow Truth Group. Remember, we had him on about a month or so ago talking about, we were trying to demystify the whole UFO thing, the whole aliens thing, and try to have an intelligent adult conversation, not rooted in, predictive programming from science fiction movies or belief in aliens, just like looking at the phenomena with a clean slate and trying to understand from a psychological, social, and personal, and even a cultural aspects, what that thing means. Tonight we're doing something different. We're going to talk about shills, infiltrators, and ways that they're trying to take the alternative movement down. And that's going to be a very powerful and useful second hour. So please tune into that. But stay with the whole show with me tonight. Bear with me, because tonight we're going to be going into the realms of the unknown, into the world of magic, which is actually the world of the known if you know what you're actually doing. But before that begins, I want to also mention that an announcement. Kevin Miller is funding a movie called Letters from Generation X. If you haven't seen his first film, Generation RX, if you haven't seen that film, it's really one of the most sobering and brilliant documentaries ever made. It's about the drugging of children via the psychiatric industry. He got so many letters from people that he had to make a second film telling these tragic and often very horrific stories of families who were affected by drugs, legalized drugs, psychotropic medications, SSRIs, etc., Prozac, Ritalin, you name them. All these monstrous consciousness-burning potions produced by Big Pharma that will be hopefully removed from the human, experience going forward, because these things are just not helping. Okay, in some cases there are psychotropic or psych meds that could help some people get over a short period, but psychiatry and Big Pharma wants us on drugs forever. They want us on Bravely World Soma. Now, you can support this film. He's already raised some money. He needs, I think, $50,000 to finish it. He doesn't make crappy films. These are like, broadcast, mainstream, film festival level documentaries that require a lot of technical resources to make them and make them look really good, because ultimately, if you want to reach the masses, they have come to expect a certain benchmark of quality of product, and Kevin can do that, and he's one of the good guys on our side. I know him quite well, and he's a lovely fella. So I'll put a link to the page where you can contribute if you want, and just check out his film, rent it from Netflix or get it from the store or buy the DVD. It's called Generation RX. And if you like that, or even if you don't like that, but you believe that we should tell the stories of ordinary people who've been damaged by psychotropic medications and psych meds, then help fund his second film, Letters from Generation X. Now, it's that time of year again. It's the time of year that the mushrooms are, which is unbelievably now classed as a Class A drug, are filling our fields, and they're, growing up, emerging from the soil in the wake of sheep and cow droppings. And people will be experimenting with entheogens, and, it's not as popular as it was when I was a teenager, when taking Liberty Caps was very popular, maybe because it's now highly illegal. I'm not saying anyone should do this. I'm just saying this is what happens. This is the world we live in. This year, I would ask people to have a mature reflection when using entheogens, because this is one of the things, you see, I've done psychedelics. I've done all of them, nearly all of them, right? Now, these are, as you know, these are not party drugs, but there's a very big, trendy scene at the moment to try and get people to party dude down Peru with ayahuasca, that kind of thing, or, that they're now being seen almost like as a fashionable thing, and they're being pushed and pushed and pushed by powerful elements within the alternative movement. Now let's think about this for a second. We in Europe, especially, this doesn't really go out to Americans, because I'm talking about people who live in Western Europe, Northwestern Europe, us, right? The British, the Irish, the Scots, the Welsh, the French, the Scandinavians. We are having our Liberty Caps, our psilocybin mushrooms coming up at the moment, okay? It's a seasonal thing. Now, people are very aware these days in growing numbers that we should only eat foods in season. So do not be eating strawberries in January, that kind of thing. Try to eat the foods that were seasonal in the past, because our bodies, our consciousness, and our psychology and physiology have adapted to seasonal growing cycles, okay? So, in winter, you try to eat the foods that would have been grown in winter. So you have your carrots and your potatoes and your turnips and your cabbage and that kind of thing. Garlic tends to grow all year round, even in this climate. And so do onions. So there's that leeks and things like that, as well as things that could have been stored up in the past, such as grains, such as nuts and things like that, and dried fruits, or late season fruits like late season apples and so on like that. And that's why at this time of year I tend to eat as many, elderberries, rose hips, blackberries as possible. Okay, it's a good idea. It's the way our bodies are done. Now let's think about this. Why would that not be applied to entheogens? See what I'm saying? So the liberty caps, the psilocybin mushrooms are appearing in the fields in this part of Europe at the moment. Okay, so in the past, our ancestors would have had their psychedelic, shamanic, transcendental experience at this time of year. Maybe there's various reasons why we've adapted to that. The height of the sun in the sky, the temperature, the foods available. This is why even if I was going to take ayahuasca and going to Peru, and even though it's in the southern hemisphere, it's still kind of very tricky, I would tend to do it at this time of year. So if you are doing these things and experimenting with these drugs, firstly, they're not for everybody. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you're not spiritual or anything like that. Don't let these kind of hippies, these kind of hippie fascists put that idea into your head that, you know, if you don't do, you're missing out on a spiritual experience if you don't do mushrooms or ayahuasca, peyote, LSD. You can have tremendous expansions in consciousness and so-called spiritual experiences without entheogens. So always remember that. You can have them through creativity and art and music. You can even have them looking at the sun going down over the ocean. And you can have them through dreams. Remember that, folks. You know me, I'm a big proponent of dreams. Keep a dream diary and constantly nurture and follow and use your dream symbolism, because the more intention and the more work you put on your dreams, the more they come back to you. So, like when you first start keeping a dream diary, you get little snippets of the dream and you don't see any meanings, and that's important not to actually look at meanings right away. But as you cultivate this idea that tonight I'm going to remember my dreams, the most amazing thing is they start to work with you. The dreams start to actually function with you and play with you. So you get a kind of a call and response effect with your dreams. And you can find them very, very useful tools. So yes, if you want to experiment with psychedelics, be mature about it. Try to do it in terms of whatever your season is, in terms of what your physiology relating to your ethnic and cultural and geographic location. Don't assume it's a party drug. And if you don't get anything spiritual from it, that's okay. And if you're afraid to do it because you might have a really bad experience, which some people do, that's okay. Like everything else in life, it's not for everyone. Now, there's this thing in Kenya is really starting to upset me. And I don't know whether I'm being manipulated by the mass media to make me as upset as possible. But we know what happened. The Westgate Mall in Nairobi was attacked by what they called Islamic radicals last week. Hundreds are dead. Several dozens are dead. Maybe the death toll might go over 100, maybe even more. We still don't know. This extremist Islamic group, as they're called, went in there, and there's all kinds of stories coming out that this thing stinks to high heaven. Apparently there are people who didn't go into the mall because they were told by families or influential friends that an attack was about to take place. Ding, 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 ding. Ring the bell, red flag. Now let's look at this in a chronological order, okay? About 6 months ago, or 6 or 8 months ago, the CEO of Nestle said that water was not a fundamental human right, and it was a commodity similar to oil, which could be sold as an actual resource commodity to people. It was not a human right. Well, when I heard that, okay, everyone was going, and quite rightly, this is psychopathic business again, but I knew that when we're dealing with these psychopaths, that what's really going on here is they're giving us a hint of what's coming. So I knew something somewhere was about to take place with water. And I was wondering about Fukushima. I was wondering about fluoride. But I knew that in the next few months they were going to make a major announcement concerning drinking water. and fresh water. And the next thing you know, the world's largest, tappable, exploitable is a better word, reservoir of fresh water is found underneath Kenya. Now, I've had people go, "Oh, that's not true. The biggest resource of water in the world is in Iceland." Well, I got news for you. It may be in Iceland, but you cannot pump that to any nearby nations because Iceland is in the middle of the North Atlantic, bordering the Arctic Ocean, and is nowhere near anywhere except Iceland. Kenya is different. Kenya can produce aquifers and aqueducts from this fresh water supply to irrigate just about all of Central and supply all of Central Africa. Something very similar to what Gaddafi was trying to do from Libya, where there's also a large but much smaller freshwater aquifer underneath his former nation, now owned by the Bank of America. But anyway, water is not just used for drinking, agriculture and irrigation. Good quality fresh water is used in all kinds of commercial and industrial uses, everything from paper making to making inks to food processing. If you have a large, an enormous resource of fresh, clean water, its market value in terms of modern commercial potential is enormous. So that's why this twat in Nestle said that. He knew it'd been found. These big corporations control the planet. These big psychopathic corporations run the show. And so that was it for me. And then I was thinking to myself, well, the next thing that's going to happen is Kenya will suddenly become an unstable region, as that monstrosity Hillary Clinton would call it. But it wasn't like that. Kenya was actually a stabilizing nation. It was getting its economy together. It was getting itself together. It was dealing with a lot of its political problems, and it was doing things like rooting out corruption even in regional governments. It was starting to look like one of the more functional in terms of, what they call democracy countries in Africa. It really was, okay? And then this Westgate Mall thing happens. Now, these Somalian extremists go in there. Now, there's a story in the Independent, the English Independent, the British Independent, and I'll put the link up there, but I don't know if I want to go into this because it actually talks about what was done to the hostages that were taken by them, and I'm not going to talk about it on the air, and I would urge caution in reading this article because it's really disturbing. But what basically we were seeing was not the behavior of Islamic extremists. Islamic extremists do not rape women. That would be considered wrong in their religion. Yes, they would behead people. That's a kind of habit. But the other things were not like that at all. They would have been definitely violations to any sect of Islam. Okay. So now we have to look. There's something else going on here. Okay. These beasts, these people. Oh, by the way, there also happened to be British and Irish ex-special forces who suddenly found themselves holding Uzis inside this shopping mall as the thing happened. So it was definitely set up. I don't care what anyone says. It's not a false flag. These fellas that were sent in there were patsies, okay? It was definitely a real attack, okay? A real attack that somebody on the outside had planned to order to destabilize Kenya so they could actually move NATO troops in there at some point, put a puppet government in, and actually have the water, similar to what Edward Bernays and the CIA did to Nicaragua with the American Fruit Company back in the 1950s. The same idea, okay? We're dealing with psychopaths. They don't think like us. They have no empathy. They have no morality. This extremist sect, from Somalia behave very much like a cult more than a religious extremist group. The need for sadistic, psychotic behavior is much more common within cults and within those kinds of groups. You think of the thugs of India. Now, don't kid yourself that the intelligence services, the military, don't take advantage of these kinds of crazed, vicious cults. The thug sect of India, back in up until the 1920s, they were, allegedly finally wiped out by the British military, were a similar kind of sadistic, murderous sect that slaughtered people to the goddess Kali. This is where the term the thugs come from. They used to steal and murder people, behead them, kill them, and torture them in order to give sacrifices to Kali. Now, you try to tell me that the British intelligence, when it captured these guys, didn't see a use in their fanaticism. And of course they did, because just about every flying saucer doomsday cult that's out there that has achieved any kind of level of economic stability is directly being funded and being manipulated through the intelligence services. This is the only reason they can live without any kind of real income in large houses, have a very high standard of living, seem to have no money problems. Even when they have very small or relatively minor, fanatics in their group, they seem to always be economically solvent. The reason for this is if you sniff around long enough, you will see that there was actually an intelligence services plant that was brought in at some point into the cult, and they're getting paid checks by the CIA, MI5, and so on. Because cults have always been very, very useful for drumming up trouble, for causing conflict, for wrecking the alternative, for damaging people who are trying to create a difference. And cults will be also used in these kinds of situations. So we need to, at some point, this Al-Shabaab group, see what their real connections are. I believe if you sniff around long enough, you'll probably find that they were a cult that had CIA connections, and they were primed for this attack. They were sent in there as patsies, not knowing the place was filled with British and Irish special forces guys with, just happened to have Uzis lying around. It was a horrific thing. Lots of innocent people were killed. And then all these cult members were probably all executed by these special forces guys who just happened to be there. Then the Kenyan army came in, cleaned up the rest of the mess, and next thing you know is that Kenya is now an unstable region, and the rest is history. It's a monstrous world we live in. It may be beautiful. It may be beautiful to look at. It may be filled with beautiful human beings and beautiful animals and beautiful flowers and plants and scenery. But don't let these new agers kid you that this is some kind of paradise, because this planet is an absolute shithole in so many ways. This is hell. More and more I've come to see this. We are living in hell, and we just have to hope that we can actually get enough of us to change things, so the demons who are currently running hell can be kicked out of power, and we can neutralize the evil that's in this place that's oppressing us and making this an awful planet for most human beings to live on. We're the lucky ones in the West. Psychopaths are the demons and the devils who are guarding this hell. That's really what it comes down to. They're the ones who get into the governments, they're the ones who get into the big corporations, and they're the ones who are causing all the mayhem because they create their order out of earth chaos. And what happened in Nairobi is a classic example of that. I am not a knee-jerk conspiracy theorist. Anyone who follows me even on Facebook knows that I'm very critical of the knee-jerk conspiracy movement. And, I'm not like that. I do, but of course I believe that the governments. See, I disagree. When what was his name? Terence McKenna used to say, "Well, I don't believe that conspiracy theory is reality because, politicians are just not that smart." Well, Terence McKenna knows it wasn't politicians who caused all the conspiracies. It's their handlers, the ones who really run the world, and yet they are very capable of very devious, large-scale, organized, and murderous, bloodthirsty conspiracies in order to keep themselves in power. It's not the politicians per se who do it, it's their handlers. And their handlers are generally involved with the corporations, the big banks, and the multinationals. We can beat this. We can. I know we can. And it's happening all the time. If we keep spreading this information around, we'll constantly nip this thing in the bud. We have to keep talking about it. And don't share hysterical links on Facebook. Share rational ones. So don't assume that everything is automatically a conspiracy theory. Like I said last week, put the brakes on, have a think about it. And if things like what happened in Nairobi, to the average person in the street is now doesn't make any sense, then you can share your ideas in a rational way about that. I really do believe that during the Boston bombing, which I don't have any opinion of because I can't make my mind up about it, too many people were instantly screaming, inside job, and they didn't know that. They were just sharing links of people with their legs blown off and stuff like that. Fake blood, and you don't know, that could have been real. And that's the kind of things that the CIA and the intelligence services wants the alternative movement to do, to make ourselves look as nutcase as possible. Again, we have to be smart and we have to have restraint. This is a form of magic. In the second half of the first hour, I'm going to be talking about magic. Magic is real. It's used on us all the time, but we can defend ourselves against magic back. And we don't do it by, having things like The Secret, or having, thinking about happy leprechauns and unicorns bouncing on rainbow-colored clouds. This is a battle, guys. We're at war. Do you understand that? We're at war with these beasts, okay? And the battlefield is human consciousness. They brought the battle to us. They came and attacked us in our minds, in our psyche, okay? We're not going to win by taking this battle out into their grounds, by protesting and fighting them and attacking them. The only way we can win this battle is to go inside, to get inside our consciousness and become insurgents in the domain of human consciousness. For in there is the keys to success. In there is the strategy to overthrow the psychopathic control grid. And in there is the most powerful thing that all of us, from anybody, from somebody who works sweeping the streets, and not to degrade street sweepers, all the way up to a decent person who might be in a corporation who's disgusted by what they're seeing. We don't do it externally, we do it internally, and we do it by developing skills and tactics and battle plans. And the first rule of engagement is no contact ever again with pathological individuals and pathological structures. That doesn't mean you throw a big hissy fit and you scream and you shout and say, we're done with you, and fuck you, I'm out of here. It's not like that at all. You must learn to become like a switch, and you switch them off. And when you do that, you switch them out of this reality. Now, it was Carrie Tree and Inside Her Tears. Lovely tune, and thanks to my friend Steve down in Lewis and Sussex for suggesting her song. That was lovely. Now, I've been visiting this haunted mansion, whatever you want to call it, not far from where I live, called Lisheen House. And when I first visited this place, I'm not kidding you, rocks were actually flying off the walls at me. It's the first time in my life I've actually experienced what could be a poltergeist kind of activity. There was no one up on these walls. They're 3-4 stories high of this huge old stately home. Now, following how I found out about Lisheen House was I was sent there after someone had mentioned that satanic rituals were taking place around it. I don't know what satanic rituals are. I don't go, but that was the term that was used. So I decided to check the location out. And it takes me, I'm not the kind of person that gets scared easy, but this Lisheen House had me leaving in a hurry. The building was literally polluted and saturated and soaked with this sense of horror. And I've never had, other than the nightmare, I've never had this experience before. The walls had this aggression to them, like I said. And the bricks were falling off the top. It wasn't birds, it wasn't ravens or anything knocking. These bricks were flying off. Now, this used to be the former home of William Phibbs, and it's near Strand Hill in County Sligo, a very beautiful part of the world, beside Ballasadair Bay. And the building was once housed this large collection of esoteric artifacts, and there was apparently the place turned into a poltergeist, I don't know, stadium, to the point where this beautiful home is abandoned. Even the Jesuits couldn't fix it. And it's still going on to this day, and I'm going up there and looking at it, and You know what it's like for me? It's like, remember the movie or the book Salem's Lot, the Stephen King things, and Ben Myers, or whatever his name was, the part was played by David Soul in the film, and he went back to Jerusalem's Lot because he wanted to see the Marston house, and he had this idea that the Marston house itself, because of the activities that took place in there with a bunch of Puritans who turned to witchcraft, that he knew something drove him there, that there was something in that house, that the actual house itself, its walls were absolutely evil. And I do believe that Lisheen House has that. And I came across this piece of an article written by an Irish journalist back in the 1970s called Des Moore. Now, it's atrocious writing, I have to say that. The standard of journalism in the 70s was just as bad as it is today. But I'll just read this article to you about this building, Lisheen House, and it's a report of a poltergeist activity in County Sligo. If things ghostly have a fascination for you, there is a gaunt ruin in the Strandhill neighbourhood of County Sligo which will draw you irresistibly. It is all that remains of a resident that once experienced the visitation of a particularly malevolent poltergeist, and still going on. And possibly there was more than one reason why it should have been so. The house was built in 1842 near the site of an older one, and I've been trying to get information on this, and I think there's also a mystery in that as well. Erected by the first of the Phibbs family to settle in these parts. They were of Cromwellian stock, and while the earlier members were notorious for their rack renting and evictions, so they were psychopathic, latter-day representatives were distinguished in other ways. Late in the last century, for instance, the house was occupied by Owen Phibbs, archaeologist and collector, whose selection of Eastern antiques including Egyptian mummies. In more recent times, Geoffrey Phibbs, who was the head librarian at Wicklow, was noted for his destructive criticism of religion. Novelist Frank O'Connor, who was both his assistant and friend, described him as, wait till you hear this, vaguely satanic, and possessed a Bible of Phibbs with notations on the improbability or impropriety of some of its contents. This journalist is obviously a bit of a religious nut, you can tell. Whether it was the Egyptian mummies, Phibbs' anti-religious writings, or some totally different cause that resulted in the advent of the poltergeist, it's impossible to say. But there's absolutely no doubt that manifestations of the customary kind, particularly of a violent nature, did take place at Seafield. That's where it is. It's called Seafield House, or that was the original name for it. Unexplained disturbances, untraceable crashing noises, still happening today. I experienced them firsthand a few times. And the feeling of an alien or evil presence in the house, absolutely, became so frequent and overpowering that at one stage in the 1920s, the house was handed over to a party of Jesuits, good luck there, for some weeks in the hope that they might rid it of the manifestations. You see, more likely that Jesuits were in there trying to develop a relationship with what Phibbs had cultured up from the ether. One of the priests in question was the late and noted Father Stephen Brown, who then had only been short time ordained. The Jesuits celebrated Mass in the house during each of their stays. I'd like to know what kind of Mass. But there appears to be no record whether their efforts to displace the poltergeist met with success. The name of the troubled house was Lisheen, and then the last of the Phibbs to occupy it sold it to a County Mayo family for demolition purposes in the 1940s. But they couldn't even do that because when they went in to try and demolish it, the workmen refused because, again, all these same paranormal things were happening, even though the Phibbs family had left and taken all their esoteric material and artifacts with them. Its stark shell still stands in the shadow of Knocknarea Mountain, but its unfriendly spirit and no one left there to terrorize has presumably taken wing. Well, Des Moore was wrong about that because I can tell you it's still going on. When I'm talking to some other people who talk about strange lights. When you hear this one, strange sort of ball lightning type lights coming up from the sea through the bay, rising up and crossing the bogland and marshland, and then entering the house, and then often seeing going back again into the sea. So whatever this guy Phibbs had done in that house, he had opened up a portal, or he had generated some kind of malevolent energy and exists in the house to this day. Now here's a new term for you. Catalytic exteriorization phenomena. This was termed by Carl Jung, and it was basically came out of an experience he had, although it wasn't the first, where he was having a row with Sigmund Freud concerning the occult, and a bookshelf almost toppled over and began shaking, and then a table split in two. Jung's frustration was so powerful that it actually changed reality. Now, this is what magic is. This is where we have to get serious about this stuff. That's one kind of magic. That's magic where, that's the very most powerful element of magic. The most powerful element of magic is where you can actually move things, cause effects, like make it rain, like Native American rain dances or Hindu rain dances, and change the environment in a quick, obvious way. But then there's another kind of magic, and this is the kind of magic that perhaps we all need to bring into our lives, because this brings us back to what I was talking about at the beginning. They're using magic on us. Now, they're not using Hogwarts, abracadabra, waving. It's not that. They're using the magic of language and the magic of symbolism. And I want to read this section from my last book, The Anvil of the Psyche. Now, I've actually studied ritual magic, and a lot of the things I've actually learned how to use in some of my books have been very helpful in defeating the psychopaths. I had a friend back when I was a teenager who was a magician, just shall we say, and I'd been studying at that time. And, I was quite young when I started this, probably 14, believe it or not. But I found that this stuff is real. I know some of you are out there laughing your heads off, but I can tell you for a fact that magic is real. I don't know whether it's quantum physics, I don't know whether it's shifting consciousness, but if you get really good at it, and you get to understand what it really is, you can actually change the world. Now, not the way films like this, the trash magic films like The Secret, or those kinds of things tell you. It doesn't happen by intention. Magic is a work. You have to actually work at this craft, but you can do it. And the proof that it works is that they use it on us all the time. So I'm going to read a section called Fundamentals of Magic. This was the system of magic that I was introduced to, but they're all pretty much the same. I'm talking about the ones that actually work. Now, let me read this to you, and I'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about and what we need to learn. Fundamentals of Magic. In order to understand how we are spellbound by the lords of perception, we must also understand the basic theories of ritual magic, which everything from marketing to advertising to propaganda and sports are used to charm us all. This is not to imply that all magic is intrinsically an evil process. It is a neutral process, and depending on the objectives of the magi, can be either good or evil. A great musician can use his or her art or craft to write a beautiful song to convey all that is good in the human emotions. Even in hard rock music, there is a kind of shamanic purging of negative emotions. I once heard Dave Navarro of the rock band Jane's Addiction and the Red Hot Chili Peppers say that he took to loud music to psychologically drown out the gunshots of his mother's murder at the hands of his stepfather when the guitarist was a teenager. This demonstrates the healing effect of art and why loud music is so important to the emotional well-being of damaged young people. The problem which arises today is that magic is almost exclusively in the hands of cheap entertainment, political spin doctors, and advertisers. They use the process to keep us trapped within a sense of dependency which feeds their craft, and which does nothing for the human soul and often negatively impacts on the collective human psyche. Although he was a rather difficult individual who used and manipulated people and situations for his own gratifications, only to end up as an impoverished drug addict, Aleister Crowley summed up the theory of magic very well. He referred to magic as the science and art used to cause change to happen in conformity with will, and thus causing actual change to occur in the material world. He called magic a science because there are predictable and measurable results from the craft. For instance, designing a large advertising billboard will result in people always noticing it. Even if it's only in their peripheral vision, they will still be affected by it. Crowley also referred to magic as an art because some people have a greater level of proficiency and talent than others, which is why the top advertising and executives, artists, and graphic designers are on Madison Avenue in New York, while others are in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, there are 5 elements of magic. All magical practices, from placing a curse upon an individual via more traditional types of sorcery, to creating a great novel which will change people's perceptions of themselves and their worldview, all adhere to the same basic magical principles. Generally, there are 5 aspects of magic which must be followed in order to bring about change. This is based on the 5 points of the pentagram, which also represent the 5 basic elements: air, fire, water, and earth, as well as aether, which represents the spiritual nature of the universe. Change is the objective of the magician or magi, be they a political spin doctor or an advertising executive. Now, you see how it changes when you change the language. When you start to think in terms of magic as being applied to media hotshots, suddenly it's not so spooky anymore. When you suddenly start talking about magic as it applies to political spin doctors, government press offices, suddenly it's not so strange anymore. I'll continue. The 5 principles commonly used are motivation, ritual, invocation, medium, and sensual. Let's now apply these to an imaginary agenda which might be a typical strategy used by the lords of perception and their objectives. We will assume that a new product needs to be brought to market for which there will be no previous demand. So the magician's product development, marketing executives, public relations, advertising specialists, and lobbyists set about the ritual in order to cause change in the material world in order to create a new market for a yet undeveloped product or concept for which there is currently no demand. Suppose the objective is to sell more lithium salts in order to get the public to accept being medicated with this chemical, as it will be a vital public health concern for their benefit. But the public is wary of taking a pharmaceutical product associated with mental illness. There is a stigma attached to lithium, which is not consumer friendly. So the lords of perception, using techniques developed by the Magi in previous centuries, will begin to change the public's perception of lithium salts in order to accept the product willingly. The first thing they do is they do the motivation. This is the first stage of the ritual magic. This is the will or the intention. This is the objective itself, the essential and vital expedient which is intended to cause the change required in the material world. In this example, a major pharmaceutical company has developed a process to produce vast quantities of lithium salts cheaply and now needs to develop a mass market for this product. Only so much of the population can be diagnosed as being bipolar, so a new method of selling this mood stabilizer is now required if the pharmaceutical company is to unload its product. Motivation always begins with a plan to create a change in the material world. The first thing required will be to change the name of the product. A team of product development experts will come up with the name Solubrium FX as their new commercial brand for lithium salts, which is to be marketed to a new non-psychiatric consumer base. The second stage of magic then kicks in is ritual. This is the action undertaken by the pharmaceutical company that employs marketing, advertising, and other resources to generate a major demand for Solubrium FX, and to justify why and how this can be done. At this point, political lobbyists will begin to influence the public and other transnational bodies on the need for more ingestion of lithium salt products based on a larger percentage of the population in order to deal with the global epidemic of suicide. Stage 3. Invocation. This will be the source or a higher power, or sometimes called an agent, called upon by the magician in order to bring about the desired result. In this case, it will be a carefully selected scientist, politicians, lawmakers, and public health bodies who will be wined and dined, who will receive campaign donations and be coached by the marketing departments of the pharmaceutical company to declare that Solubrium FX added in small doses to the drinking water supply is a public health necessity in order to save lives. They will cite studies by the pharmaceutical company's own scientists which prove conclusively that Solubrium FX added to the public water supply reduces suicide by alleviating depression. The politicians will suggest a test community, usually one with high rates of poverty and socioeconomic disadvantage, to run a pilot program in order to demonstrate the effectiveness of adding Solubrium FX to the municipal drinking water supply. Stage 4. The medium. As politicians are generally distrusted by the public, A medium or the conviction or emotional desire will be employed. This will be in the guise of people suffering from depression and bipolar disorder, filling our TV screens and other mass media outlets to play on the emotions of the population. These people will be used to convey to the general public how lithium salts prescribed by their psychiatrists gave them a better quality of life and eased their mood swings. Likewise, parents of teenagers who committed suicide will be interjected into these reports with framed photos of the deceased child behind them, as they tell TV reporters something must be done before another depressed person takes their own life. On commercial TV channels, the pharmaceutical company will often buy up blocks of expensive primetime advertising space to air the commercials and other products they already have on the market in order to influence the programming directors to do more features on depression and suicide. This will also be a psychopathic aspect to this agenda, as the pharmaceutical company will be well aware that constant news stories and TV reports of suicide generally result in copycat suicide clustering among emotionally fragile teens. Yes, this is how some of the psychopathic business types will think. It is that evil, and in some cases when big money pay huge paychecks are a factor, it's just business. And then the final stage of ritual magic is the ensual, or the outcome, or the result. This is the final change which is brought about when the politicians and lawmakers sign the Mental Health Right to Happiness Act into law, and the pharmaceutical directors, along with all the other magicians during the process chain, sit back and get their huge bonuses for developing a non-ending income stream based on their original intention. Although this example, as prosaic and disturbingly plausible as it is nothing new. It follows a precedent which has been set long in the past with everything from DDT to sodium fluoride. It may seem strange that I'm using terms such as magic and ritual. This is not sensationalism on my behalf, as the Lords of Perception in their own documents use these terms in very direct and nonchalant manners. This is literally how they function. There are manuals on corporate neuro-linguistic programming which openly flaunt terms such as magic, enchantment, and charm in their training modules. The reason for this is that many of these esoteric ideas, being part and parcel of commercial realities in the modern age, are due to them having originally come out of the alchemical traditions and Freemasonic lodges in the decades following the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, where the same occult knowledge used to indoctrinate and empower the lodge members was brought out into the legislative and legal bodies and eventually on to become commercial and mercantile practice. Some of the most powerful political and social figures of the 20th century, such as Edward Bernays, the father of propaganda and public relations, can be viewed as magicians as much as manipulators of human psychology and social identity. Saul Alinsky is another example of a modern magi who dedicated an incredibly influential book, Rules for Radicals, to Lucifer, and he wrote, I quote, "Lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical. From all our legends, mythology, and history, the first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer." And that's what magic is, folks. Magic is the use of language, symbolism, ideas in order to change your will, change reality in conformity with will. But right now, it's being changed in conformity with the will of the corporations, the globalists, the multinationals, the transnationals, the quangos, and the NGOs. When you understand that everything from climate change to a political campaign to things like inflation, a banking crisis, everything, these are magical spells being placed upon your consciousness. When you can actually break them down, get my book, say, like The Amber of the Psyche, and become aware of it, you start to see the 5 stages of ritual magic in everything that's being pushed towards you. When you understand this, you then see the power of being able to defend your consciousness against it. if there's one thing I can actually say I did with my life that's probably helped a lot of people, is I came up with the concept no contact ever again. That was my way of dealing with pathological individuals like psychopaths, or pathological situations like a bad working environment, a bad social network, or a bully at work. Do not engage with them, or even your government. This is why I'm against protesting and rioting and stuff. No contact ever again came out of my interest in Slavic paganism and witchcraft. And it was based on something called silence magic. That if there was somebody in the community who was disruptive to the community, in terms of a thief, a robber, whatever, what would happen is they would all go silent on this person. They would act like they didn't exist. And this bully or this tyrant would not be getting any energy off them, and he would literally leave the town. And this is what happens. You remove the toxic individual or the toxic situation from your reality. You literally switch them off like a TV channel out of your reality. And when you understand how magic works, then when you go about trying to wake others up, you then realize that the way to do it is to develop the art and the craft of magical ritual. And don't give me this thing that's satanic or to do with Jesus and all that. It puts down God and all this stuff. It doesn't, okay? It's just using the same tools. Magic is neutral like everything else. A knife can be used to cut an apple off a tree or to rob a person. It's just a tool, okay? And you use this tool to defend your consciousness. And it happens in your head. It's the one place they can't get into you. And you do it everywhere. And I'm always saying to people in Ireland, get out of your 1970s mindset that you have to march and wave flags and be angry at the government. Don't do that anymore. Because what that does is that gives them your power. That creates a sense of submission to the superior magi in government buildings. And you see these memes all over Facebook, and it shows pictures of revolutions and riots and huge marches all over the world. And it says, when will it be America's turn? When will this happen in England? Well, let's hope it never does, because that's what the government wants. And I often suspect that these memes are actually created by government agents and spies and shills. Don't do that. Protests and meetings and get-togethers are great for networking and finding out who the shills are. If you do want to do something, think in magical terms. A public relations event. Something that captures. Think, if you want to get something done, say you want to highlight things about GMOs, it's no use raging at Monsanto or screaming at your local Ministry for Food and Health. What you got to do is you got to do something that captures the public's imagination. And you have to create these 5 stages of ritual magic in order to sell your message of why GMOs are bad or whatever your issue is to the general public. You have to literally put people on the street under a spell. And when you have them under that spell, you can actually bring them round to the good side and take them away from the bastard psychopaths and their magic that's running the world. This is to be there for everyone. Now, one final warning about this use of magic. Do not expect instant results. Some of you will get it, and some of you won't. And I'll be talking, if you want me to talk more about how magic is done in future radio shows, broadcasts, I'll do it. But remember, Crowley said, and this wasn't his original idea, because this has been going around for centuries, that it's an art and a science. That means there's specific steps to deal and to actually implement magic, but there's also an element of art, meaning that some people have a talent for it that's better than others, which is why some artists, through their talent, can reach people more effectively, or some books sell in bigger numbers and others don't, or some people can stand up there and make a difference. That's because they have the art, but we all have this ability. And from now on, I want you to start thinking of your oppression and of your anger at the control system in terms of magical spells being placed on you and how you can defend yourself from them.